Robert Johnson had been working as the bank's director for many years and was considered one of the best specialists in the field. Robert had to go through a lot to reach the top of the management hierarchy. While he had succeeded in the business world, he wasn't nearly as fortunate in his personal life. Robert was already 45 years old, but he'd never been married and was considered an incurable bachelor by his business associates. He did have occasional relationships in his life, some of them even quite passionate. However, they never ended in anything serious, let alone marriage. Robert often joked about it, attributing his single status to his profession. Few people knew anything about his past, but rumors had it that it was quite eventful. Robert always kept it a secret, only delving into it when nostalgia struck him particularly hard. He would then sit in his chair and browse through old photographs. In one of those photos, he was a 7-year-old boy fishing in the river. In the next, he posed as a quarterback for the university football team. While the first 2 photos brought a sweet smile to his face, the third made him sad. It pictured a young woman named Monica, the first and only love of his life. As it often happens, Robert's parents didn't approve of their son's choice and did everything to thwart their union. However, young Robert had a stubborn nature, which meant that he wasn't going to back down without a fight. Their relationship was headed for the wedding, and Robert believed that nothing and no one could stop them. However, as it later turned out, he was gravely mistaken. Unfortunately, Monica had a change of heart on their wedding day and left Robert at the altar. Robert waited for her at the altar for an hour, but she never arrived. Extensive searches and phone calls yielded no results. Monica seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth. There's no need to explain how deeply hurt Robert was. He fell into a terrible depression shortly after the failed wedding. It seemed to him that his life was over and there was no light at the end of the tunnel. In an attempt to help him get over the breakup, Robert's parents sent him abroad for an internship in one of the Western European countries. He'd only returned home 10 years later, already a true professional in his field. Having taken over the position of the bank's director from his father, Robert quickly got the hang of things. Those who dealt with the banker in business invariably praised his professionalism and kind heart. Such qualities were typically considered incompatible in the business world, but not in Robert's case. Of course, nobody knew what was truly going on in the businessman's soul. Sharing his home with his Labrador, Buddy, Robert dreamed of having a family, something he had never experienced. If someone had told Robert 20 years ago what he'd been dreaming about, he would have never believed it. He might have even laughed at the suggestion. But now, when harsh reality spoke differently, he accepted it as it was. Robert had long since come to terms with his role as a bachelor and paid no attention to his colleagues' jokes about it. He knew that everyone had their cross to bear, and he would bear his with dignity, doing what he did best at. That day, Robert fed Buddy in the morning, had a cup of coffee, and headed to work. By his age, he had everything one could dream of: a big house, an expensive car, and a high-paying job he actually loved. Having smiled at the assistant sitting by his office, Robert opened the door and settled in his comfortable leather chair. At this time, he usually read the fresh newspaper and reviewed department reports. Everyone knew that it was best not to disturb Robert at this time, allowing him to be alone with himself. But on this particular morning, things didn't go as planned. It all started with the knock on the door. "Come in, it's open," Robert muttered irritably, raising an eyebrow. The head of the loan department, Phil Brown, appeared at the door. "Mr. Johnson, sir, there's a woman here to see you," Phil stammered. Robert frowned. Meeting with bank clients never brought him anything but a headache. Well, she's probably going to complain about family problems and her inability to make timely payments on her loan, Robert thought. However, things turned out differently. "Sir, this woman is here about her mortgage, but she wants a personal meeting with you," Phil Brown hesitated to explain. Robert sighed. He was getting more annoyed by the minute. "Fine, get me her documents and a copy of the loan agreement. I'll see what I can do, but I'm not ready to meet her in person yet." The department head let out a relieved sigh and quickly handed over the woman's folder. Meanwhile, the customer remained standing in the hallway. Robert shook his head and opened the folder reluctantly. The truth was that he didn't really have to look inside, as he was pretty sure what he was going to see there. The 45-year-old woman intended to take out a mortgage loan to buy a house for her daughter. The story was as old as time itself. What was supposed to be so special about it? Robert scanned the document with account details and taxpayer information with a rather indifferent look on his face. Then he saw something that made him feel uneasy. Initially, the banker thought that his mind was playing a cruel trick on him. However, upon closer examination, he realized that there was no mistake. The document he had in his hands belonged to Monica Cooper. Yes, that Monica, the one Robert had loved with all of his heart. Actually, the one he still loved with all of his heart. Robert rose from his chair decisively and hastily left his office. His heart was pounding loudly, and his cheeks turned red. He shot a questioning look at his assistant, who immediately pointed to the slender woman waiting in the reception area. The banker turned around and froze in astonishment. It really was Monica standing in front of him, the very same woman who ran away from their own wedding 20 years ago. Monica recognized him as well. She smiled and said, "Well, hello, Robert." Overwhelmed with joy and excitement, Robert was on the verge of breaking into a dance like a child who just got a toy he'd been dreaming about. He escorted Monica to his office and asked his assistant to bring them coffee and some sweets. But it was all just a gesture of hospitality. In reality, Robert was only interested in one thing. He wanted to know what truly happened 20 years ago. Monica was the only person who could provide the answer to his question, as her actions had remained a mystery to Robert all of these years. Having taken a sip of her coffee, the woman began her story. It all began long before the wedding, when Robert's parents started threatening Monica and trying to dissuade her from marrying their son. Despite the best efforts of the modest young woman, she was powerless against their pressure. "Look, if you don't listen to us now, we'll have to make sure you will get divorced eventually. You two will break up sooner or later, only then you won't get any help from us," Amanda Johnson would say. Monica cried a lot during that time, but the tears didn't bring any relief. Robert's father went even further in his threats, promising to have her thrown in jail. Having found herself in such a difficult situation, Monica fell into depression, but Robert wasn't even aware of her struggles. That was when the unfortunate young woman decided to run away from her own wedding. In reality, she simply felt like she had no choice, and it was Robert's parents who had put her in that position. Unfortunately, breaking ties with the person she loved most, Monica didn't yet know one crucial fact. She was already pregnant at the time. This news had the effect of a cold shower on Robert. Pregnant? Does that mean, do I have a child? Why didn't you tell me? Robert exclaimed. Monica smiled sadly and shook her head. How could I have told you when your father threatened to put me in jail? I'm sorry, but I had no other choice. Your family had enough connections to make my life a living hell. So don't blame me for any of this. Robert shuddered. So, how old is my daughter now? I'm right, aren't I? I do have a daughter. Monica lowered her eyes in embarrassment and replied, Lois is 20, Robert, and she's pregnant. Her fiance is a good guy. Unfortunately, he has serious health problems, but doctors say it's treatable. Robert's head was spinning from all the information. He had a daughter, and she was pregnant. That meant that he would become a grandfather. Tears welled up in his eyes. At that moment, he mentally forgave everyone involved in everything that had happened 20 years ago. Hugging Monica, Robert instantly forgot about everything else in the world, including work and the myriad of minor issues associated with it. As it turned out later, Lois's fiance was a young man named Michael. When Robert first saw him, he immediately felt respect for the young man. Although Michael had a noticeable limp, he seemed rather confident and independent. According to Monica, Michael had gotten into a car accident 2 years ago when a 5-year-old girl suddenly ran onto the road. Michael didn't have a choice. He swerved and ended up diving into a ditch, suffering serious injuries in the crash. Ever since then, Michael had been limping on his left leg. Upon learning Michael's story, Robert promptly offered to help him by contacting the leading orthopedic centers in the country, which specialized in musculoskeletal injuries. Michael's case wasn't unique, and under certain circumstances, it could be treated. Meanwhile, it took Monica a lot of time and effort to explain to her daughter the reasons behind her separation from Robert. Fortunately, Nancy was a kind and understanding young woman who didn't judge her parents. And how could she? After all, she was going to be a mother soon, too. However, the most interesting part was yet to come when Robert and Monica decided to finally get married after all of these years. They've been deprived of the chance to live happily as a family for so long, and now they would finally be able to call each other husband and wife. The guests of honor at the ceremony were Michael, who had completed his rehabilitation course after the successful surgery on his knee, and Nancy, holding their newborn baby. At that moment, Robert realized that he didn't want any other life than the one he had now. After all, he had everything he needed to be happy, as well as good fortune and high social standing.